Coming up on this episode, Austria's sinkhole problem returns, Kosovo become unofficial world champions, Moldova have a day to forget, Suriname benefit from sports passports, and Bolivia turn to altitude again. Hello, and welcome to The Sweeper, the World Football podcast made in association with FIFA Plus. I'm Lee Wingate.
And I'm Paul Watson.
And usually, around the international windows, we try to find a balance on our episodes between international and club football. But ultimately, we go where the stories are, and our best ones were all from international football this time around. We're going to start in Europe in part one, Paul. Where do you want to go first? Austria, Kosovo, or Moldova?
I think we should start in Austria, Lee. And that's not just because you're in Austria, but it's because it's a topic I really want to hear your opinion on.
All right, let's dive into it. Let's start with the sport, because this was a big international window for Austria, who haven't been at a World Cup since 1998. And at the start of this group, Bosnia and Herzegovina pulled into a strong lead with 12 points from 4 games. But Austria are now level with Bosnia, having played a game fewer after beating Cyprus and then going away to Bosnia and winning 2-1. So big from a sports perspective for Austria. But I think what you're referring to, Paul, are the off-the-pitch stories, starting with the sinkhole problem, because in the game against Cyprus, on the pitch at the Raiffeisen Arena, a sinkhole of 30 to 40 centimetres appeared in the turf, leading to the game being postponed for 7 minutes so that it could be filled with soil so the game could continue again. But what is even more bizarre about this is it's the second time in 3 years that this has happened, because at the Nations League game against Denmark in 2022, an even bigger sinkhole appeared at a different stadium, the Ernst-Happel-Stadion in Vienna. So Austria has a sinkhole problem.
Yeah, and this is the weirdest thing. So when I saw this story pop up, my first thought was that it was repeating an old story. I thought people had got hold of an old story and they were regurgitating it. Then when I realised it was a new sinkhole, I presumed it was also at the Ernst-Happel Stadium, that there's a really big problem there. But for it to be a different stadium, another sinkhole during an Austria match, what's going on, Lee? Is there some sort of fault line in Austria that we don't know about?
It's really bizarre, isn't it? I think, so for the Ernst-Happel Stadion, it was a bit more explainable, because that is a very old stadium, and apparently there were sort of hidden cavities underneath the soil that can be activated by weather conditions. So when water seeps in, they sort of collapse upwards. So I think it was attributed to being a one-off due to an old pitch. But the interesting thing is that the Cyprus game was played at Lask's Raiffeisen Arena in Linz, where the pitch was only laid in 2023. That was when the stadium opened. So this is happening at a brand new stadium now.
It's bizarre. There's no explanation at all for this then. I mean, I genuinely don't get it. And I think if Austria was due to be hosting something, I'd be a bit concerned right now, because the size of these holes, right? So I think you mentioned them theoretically, and I've seen it written, but the one that really kind of brought it home to me was that it's the size of a football, wasn't it, this latest hole? That's really pretty big hole to have in a pitch.
Yeah, and the first one at the Ernst-Happel Stadion, after the final whistle, a Denmark player put his leg in it to show how deep it was, and it went all the way up to his knee. So you imagine if you're like a footballer and you end up stepping in something like that, that'll break your leg, won't it? So it's obviously very dangerous, and it poses an increased risk of injury. I think it's a very bad look for the Austrian FA, and I think they need to find a playing surface that doesn't suddenly open up with a sinkhole.
This is worse than my childhood Sabutio. We lost a lot of good men on my Sabutio pitches. And my mum would hoover a few of them up. I mean, we're getting towards that point, aren't we?
You know what was also quite funny over the international break to do with Austria? It's Ralf Rangnick, the coach, cycling around on an e-bike because he's had an ankle operation and he's been told to take it easy, not walk too much. And I've just got these visions of Ralf Rangnick driving his e-bike into a sinkhole.
How he would have wanted to go, I think, Lee.
Yeah.
I can imagine Ralf Rangnick, that's his only promotion now, isn't it? Like, you go from being like coach and sort of technical director, and then you're just in the surface.
Yeah.
He's just part of the pitch. No, it's very cool seeing him on it, but I've never seen anyone do that. I don't ever remember a manager cycling across the field to give a team talk. He's very naturally cool, in my opinion, Ralf Rangnick. It's like he never tries to be, but he just says stuff and does stuff that I just think, yeah, he's just a cool guy.
Yeah, he wasn't up for cycling either. It was an e-bike, so minimising the effort. But I suppose that is understandable in the circumstances. Ralf Rangnick was not the only coach that made headlines in this particular World Cup qualification group over the September window. Romania boss Mircea Lucescu became what, Paul, in September?
Now, he is the oldest international football coach ever, is he?
Close. He's the oldest coach currently active in world football at 80 years and I think 30 days, 80 years and 1 month approximately, when he took charge of the games against Canada and Cyprus.
Wow, so people have gone longer than that? Because I was trying to think if I could think of a manager that sort of jumped out at me as definitely being older than that. I couldn't think of one.
There is one in the international game and one in the club game who are just narrowly older than Mircea Lucescu, and these both happened fairly recently. So in international football, you may have heard of Otto Pfister of Germany, who managed Afghanistan against Cambodia in an Asian Cup qualifier in March 2018 at the age of 80 years and 123 days. But the very oldest coach, according to the IFSHS, is Roger Lemaire of France, who managed Étoile du Sahel versus Club Africain in the Tunisian League in March 2022 at the age of 80 years, 260 days. Actually, Lucescu is pretty close to breaking that.
Yeah. Although there is talk that he's going to leave, isn't there? Is there some people are saying he might leave right now? I don't know why that is. Is that, or have I made that up?
I think it was a disappointing result against Cyprus, and so he has offered his resignation if the Romanian FA can find a viable alternative. So there's a lot of ifs and buts here. If Lucescu stays in the job, if Romania somehow managed to qualify for the World Cup, but he would then become the oldest coach in football history during the tournament.
God, that is incredible, isn't it? What an amazing record that is. I mean, he's had a phenomenal career. Just one of these people that has been around forever, done so many incredible things. I was surprised to see him popping back up, though. I wonder what kind of a message it does send to other coaches in the country if you're still calling on an 80-year-old, really.
Yeah, and an 80-year-old who has actually previously coached the Romania national team between 1981 and 1986. So that's so long ago that none of his current squad were even born the last time he was Romania coach.
That is an amazing statistic, isn't it? Yeah. I mean, you just also think the stress of the job and the pressures it puts you under to still be doing that at 80. Otherwise, I say that, I'm kind of aware that the President of the United States this is often about 80. That's probably quite a stressful job too. But, it's amazing to think you can still be doing that at that age. And I would love to see him make it to the World Cup he is a legend.
I can't wait for us to still be making the sweeper in 2070 at the age of 81 and 86 respectively.
Could you imagine some of the stories we'd be harking back to? Lee, I think 45 years ago there was a sinkhole in Austria. There's just so many. Like the third sinkhole opens up in 40 years' time. We're like, this just always happens in Austria.
Paul, do you remember that time when San Marino had never won a game?
Yeah. And now obviously they're world champions. It's hard to remember, but...
That to look forward to. We've got a few other headlines to round up from Austria. I think the Amateur Nations Cup is something that's caught our attention, Paul. A European football tournament for amateur national teams taking place in Vienna from the 5th to the 8th of October. But why has this specifically piqued our interest?
Because Greenland are going to be there. This is their... I suppose this is their chance to play some competitive football, having been rejected by CONCACAF and having FIFA options taken off the table. They are planning to take part in this competition in Austria. I also like to think they're just visiting you, Lee, but maybe they'll stay with you. But it's an interesting competition. I'll be totally honest. I've struggled to find much information in terms of, this is quite soon. I can't seem to see the schedule or the fixtures, the timings of it. Have you managed to find that?
Weirdly, they have published the matchday 2 fixtures, but not the matchday 1 ones. Not highly logical, but it's taking place at Ebrechtsdorf, which is in Lower Austria, outside of Vienna. So I'm sure I'll pop along to that. It's got Austria, Bosnia and Herzegovina, Slovenia, and as you say, Greenland. Yeah, it's going to be interesting, I think. It's a chance for, as you say, for Greenland to sort of play some kind of football, because we've been sort of hypothesizing about what their next steps would be after the CONCACAF rejection.
Yeah, exactly. And I think this could be a really good test for their players. Interesting to see how the level compares. So the idea of there being amateur national teams was interesting to me too. I was trying to work out which countries have an amateur national team, because in certain countries that will be easier to pick than others, I suppose, because, for example, in England, you have this kind of semi-professional level that goes really far down, but it's not totally clear where you switch from being fully amateur to being semi-pro. So yeah, I was intrigued to see which countries have a sort of recognised amateur team. And it seems like a funny mix, doesn't it? It seems like quite Central European in its makeup.
Austria also made headlines for another reason, Paul. Do you know what title they won at the weekend?
Oh, no, they didn't. They didn't win the Tram Driver World Championships, did they?
They certainly did, yes.
On home soil.
We're going to take a brief... No sinkholes, fortunately, for the trams. We're going to take a brief diversion into the world of tram driving, because I was with friend of the pod, the Tim Traveller, a great YouTuber. You should watch his travel videos. He's basically the sweeper, but non-football. And he covered the 2025 World Tram Driver Championships in Vienna. 26 cities competing for glory across 8 disciplines that range from a stop-and-go challenge to tram bowling. So there was all sorts of stuff to enjoy. And the crowds really, really turned up in numbers and got behind this. And actually, at one point, you could not get near the front to see the live event. People were climbing onto lampposts to see over the crowd. It was like Argentina's World Cup celebration. People clinging onto lampposts to see the trams. It was an incredible occasion.
It just sounds amazing. But so is it one... It's like there's one team. There's Team Austria, or is it like different categories? Like, how does this work?
Yeah, there's one team per city, except for Germany, whose team was split across Berlin and Leipzig, I think. But yeah, the Polish team was streets ahead. They were from Poznan.
Literally.
So we all thought they were going to win.
Yeah.
And then they ceded pole position, and then Austria stole in.
Is it like a decathlon that you get points for each event and it adds up to a leaderboard? So what was the final event? What was the one that won it?
Oh, it didn't quite work like that. You each got like a 6-minute run, and then so you did all 8 things at once, and then your second driver went in the second half of the event. But yeah, absolutely fantastic. Tim will be uploading a video about that in a couple of weeks. But I had a fantastic time at the World Tram Driver Championships. He said to me, "Shall I apply for a media accreditation for you?" I thought I might be stretching it a little bit far.
Well, yeah, the road sweeper. I don't know. Yeah, we might struggle.
Yeah. But yeah, plenty going on in Austria at the moment. You can, of course, find out more about all of this kind of stuff on our sister show, the Austrian football podcast, The Other Bundesliga, which I co-host with producer Tom and Simon Clark. So do tune into that. We're going to move across now to Kosovo, Paul, because Kosovo have a world title.
They are. They're the unofficial world champions, which they won by beating Sweden quite unexpectedly. They beat them 2-0 in this window in Pristina. I think we mentioned the unofficial world championship before, but a lot of people may not know how this works. Basically, as I understand it, at some point, someone had a lot of time on their hands, went back to the very first international match, England versus Scotland in 1872, and then carried on as if it was a boxing belt. So if you win that game, you keep the title until someone beats you, and then they take the title until someone beats them. And they'd worked it out at the time, I think, all the way through to somewhere in the sort of around 2015 or 16, and that's just carried on from then, isn't it?
Yes, it has, yeah. And it's had some interesting winners in recent times, because Argentina held it coincidentally at the time that they won the World Cup. Then I think it transferred to Uruguay, then across to Africa. Now it's moved into Europe. And yeah, as you say, Kosovo took it from Sweden. So now I think the newest FIFA member state, perhaps. I'm not entirely sure on that, but Kosovo joining in 2016, I think that makes them the newest, are currently the unofficial Football World Champions. And they have joined a list of countries who have won at least one unofficial World Football Championship match, along with Australia, Curacao, Israel, Sierra Leone, South Korea, Turkey, and Venezuela. What a group.
It's brilliant, isn't it? I really love this as an idea. I love the random nature, because somewhere in my mindset, I thought, wouldn't this just stick with a really big nation and that would be it? It would just be stuck. But it's true that no one really stays unbeaten for that long, do they? And then obviously once it goes somewhere, it keeps moving around. But it is interesting that it can go to countries that aren't necessarily your obvious choices.
Yeah, I think it does get stuck in a region for a while, because obviously international football's broken down into confederations, and only if there's a kind of wider tournament or an intercontinental friendly do you then get the chance for that to move to another continent. But at the moment it is in Europe. Kosovo will have the chance to defend that title when they take on Slovenia in their next World Cup qualification match in October 2025. This was not the only thing that we recently posted about on social media to do with Kosovo. We also posted about the 7 banned matchups in UEFA football. And this got a lot of reaction, unsurprisingly. I think it is the most viral social media post the Sweeper has ever done. It's got over 2 million impressions, 70,000 likes, plenty of shares, and Paul, a hell of a lot of comments. So we thought that we would take a very brief overview and have a look at what those banned clashes are and what would happen if those teams actually got through to a knockout phase and could theoretically face each other. So a lot of people will know this already. I think we've talked about it before, but there are 7 banned matchups in UEFA, and they are Spain, Gibraltar, Armenia, Azerbaijan, Kosovo, Serbia, Kosovo, Bosnia and Herzegovina, Kosovo, Russia, Ukraine, Russia, and Ukraine, Belarus. Now, with Russia being suspended from UEFA at the moment, only 5 of those 7 are even on the cards, but that's quite a lot of banned clashes, which is something that other continents don't necessarily seem to have. And when we posted about this on social media, one of the key questions we had is what would happen if they then got 2 of these banned nations got through to a knockout phase. Would they be able to face each other? And the short answer is it's not really been tested, because quite a few of these countries, like Kosovo, only joined FIFA in 2016. I think Gibraltar was only a few years before that. And so what's really happened is that none of these countries have actually faced each other very much. But theoretically, it is possible, because they are only protected from facing each other during a group draw, which means if they did get through, perhaps they would then try and keep, say, Serbia and Kosovo apart in an initial bracket. But then, theoretically, they would have to face each other at some point, and they would be allowed to play then.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's all about controlling the controllables, isn't it? It's about making sure these ties, where possible, don't happen. But once you get into the uncontrollable, which is a major tournament, it would be really weird if they started trying to actively keep 2 teams apart. It would sort of ruin the integrity of the competition, I think. So the other thing that I think maybe is a factor is that once you're into a major tournament, it's being hosted on neutral territory anyway. I think what they're trying to avoid is, for example, like Kosovo showing up in Bosnia and Herzegovina and all that would come with that. Whereas if you're in a completely separate part of the world, there's probably a lot less chance of violence and of these problems manifesting. But it is really interesting that it's never been tested. I guess it's partly just the nature of the teams we're talking about. Very few of them actually are teams that have qualified for tournaments. Only really Ukraine and Russia and Spain out of that list we've given. And I suppose Serbia. But yeah, it's Kosovo that haven't really ever qualified for anything, any major tournament.
And Kosovo involved in 3 of those banned 7 pairings. On another geopolitical note, I thought I'd give a quick mention to Football Meets Data. They're a really great Twitter and Instagram account. And they posted a graphic, which I found very interesting. They have a simulator to predict which countries are going to qualify for the World Cup. And looking at their graphic was almost like looking at a map of Europe back during the Cold War when the Iron Curtain existed. Because with a couple of exceptions, being Croatia, projected to qualify, and Italy and some of the home nations not projected to qualify, it was like looking at an Iron Curtain map. All of Western Europe projected to qualify for the World Cup. All of Eastern Europe, apart from Croatia, projected not to qualify.
That's really interesting. That is very interesting. I love, by the way, I love these projection things. I love when they work out the percentage chance of a nation qualifying. I'm always imagine the manager getting home and sort of saying, we still got the positives here. Oh, we're 3.1% chance of qualifying.
Yeah, I don't know how that works, to be honest.
No, they must, I suppose they work out the odds of, the same way the bookmakers can make odds for games. I suppose they're looking at the odds of those results and then the odds of the other results that are necessary for a team to qualify, and then they can work it out. I find that really interesting. I don't know if that's coincidence or whether it's that Western Europe has advantages over Eastern Europe. I'm trying to think if there are any nations that would necessarily stand out as being surprising here, but there are a lot of Eastern European nations that are not massively having their best time as well.
Well, I think it reflects a general trend in football, because if you look at like the Champions League lineup now, okay, you've got Karabag, you have Kairat, but for the vast majority of the sort of the map, it's all clubs in Western Europe or Central Europe. So I think it's just that the sort of direction football is moving. A lot of the money and success is concentrated in Western Europe at the moment. We've got one more thing we wanted to talk about in part one for Europe, Paul. Moldova. What happened when Moldova played against Norway?
Well, they somehow managed to lose 11-1. And I wonder if this is one of those ones. Do you remember when England lost to USA at that World Cup? Was it 1950? And at the time, English people were so arrogant that when they saw it written in the newspaper, they thought it was a misprint and that England had won 10-1 or something. It was like, there was this kind of assumption that it must be wrong. I wonder if anyone in Moldova thought this was 1-1.
Yeah, I mean, it is the biggest European World Cup qualifying victory or margin of victory this century. It's massive. I think the only bigger World Cup qualifying win in Europe was back in 1969 when Germany beat Cyprus 12-0. I think that tells you everything you need to know. And Erling Haaland reportedly apologising to the Moldova goalkeeper, Christian Avram.
Yeah, apparently every time, because they wanted to rack up the goals. Norway, their goal difference now is so superior to Italy's that it has made a huge difference on that group. It's more or less made Italy's task impossible to depose Norway. So every time they scored, they were running to get the ball out of the net because they thought they could get more, which is something you don't usually do. The feeling of being 7 or 8 goals ahead and you're still running to get the ball out of the net. And I think Haaland just felt bad. Apparently, he was going to the goalkeeper and saying, "It's not your fault, mate. I'm so sorry. It's not your fault." And you just think, God, what an awful thing to hear. It feels like what you'd say if you're scoring past like your little brother or something. It feels. Yeah. I know he was doing it to be a nice guy, but it almost feels vaguely sort of insulting to have someone apologise for scoring past you.
Yeah, I wrote on Twitter at full time that I was looking for a pun that would suitably reflect how disastrous a night this was for Moldova, but I couldn't come up with it spontaneously because it was something that needed to be Moldova.
Oh,
and
yeah, I mean, I don't expect anything else of you.
But we did get a far superior comment from a Twitter follower who said, "They think it's Moldova. It is now."
Oh, yeah, no, fair enough. And it is Moldova for the boss. It looked for a while like Sergei Kleshenko might hold on. He would have to really have gone to ground and just hidden until everyone forgot the result. But no, he resigned after that one. But yeah, I mean, the weird thing is Moldova, for context, like this is so surprising, really, because they've not been bad. I know they've had some times where they've really not been great, but actually, they only lost 2 of their 10 games in 2024. They're not the kind of team you expect to lose by this margin. It was a real freak event, I think. I don't expect to see another one of these, but yeah, it was a bit of a moment where you saw that, they were already 9 and you thought, oh no.
Yeah.
This looks bad.
Quick piece of trivia, Paul, before we move on to the remaining headlines from Europe. What is the record margin of victory for a World Cup qualifier?
It's still got to be Australia 31, American Samoa 0, hasn't it?
Yeah.
Which changed. I don't know if that directly, but I think that sort of changed the whole way qualifying was done in the region, and it also fed into this thing that got Australia to leave OFC, I think, because it was a sense of this just isn't doing anyone any good. And that thing of Archie Thompson scoring 13 goals in that game as well, getting that quadruple hat trick.
Yeah, mad.
That did just feel mean, because I don't think they did need the goal difference that time.
Yeah. And do you know when Australia scored 31 goals that day, do you know whose record they broke?
Ooh. No. Oh, hadn't Australia already smashed someone in the groups? And
Yes. 2 days earlier, they beat Tonga 22-0. So that record stood for 2 days.
That's amazing. That's a little bit like the the game between Arbroath and Bonaccord that was for a long time the biggest ever score, the Scottish game that was 36-0. On that same day, another game was 35-0.
Ah.
There's a little bit
You'd
of
feel well gutted if that was you, wouldn't you?
You would.
Completely
and
overshadowed.
And a little side note to the American Samoa defeat, I didn't know this until recently. One of the reasons it was so high is because FIFA just brought in a rule that all the American Samoa players had to have a passport to play for them. And actually, most of the squad just didn't have the right passport documentation. So they ended up having to bring in just a load of just young guys who had passports. It was like a fraction of the squad they'd been training for the game with. So like that 31-0 was always held up as a sort of, God, look how bad American Samoa were. But actually, they were playing with almost none of their first choice players.
Mm-hmm. Okay, a quick mention for Slovakia, Paul, because they beat Germany competitively for the first time ever. Pretty amazing. We've talked about their coach before, Francesco Calzona. He once resigned as boss of Tuscan amateur team Tegoletto in order to focus on his job as a coffee dealer. Now, he's potentially on the cusp of a World Cup with Slovakia.
Yeah, or is he going to just give it all up and make the world's best coffee?
Yeah, who knows? Who knows?
What a result that was, though. Yeah, I think to some extent, especially in the UK, that result a little bit slipped under the radar. It was an amazing win for Slovakia. More than that, I think it was really only told as a look how bad this result is for Germany, which it is. But that is quite something, and I really, I'm quite excited by the path Slovakia are on.
Finally, Iceland beat Azerbaijan 5-0 in Reykjavik. This was their biggest ever victory against a non-microstate opponent. And then they went ahead in France, but ultimately succumbed to a 2-1 defeat. This is the Icelandic revival, I guess, because they became the smallest ever country by population to qualify for a World Cup in 2018. Then they had a bit of a dip, sort of disappeared off the radar for a few years. Are Iceland back, Paul?
They're back. They're back, Lee. Yeah. The only small caveat is Azerbaijan had been dreadful, and that was the end of Fernando Santos as head coach. It really just it had been pretty poor from Azerbaijan. They are better than that, but yeah, nice to see Iceland back firing again, and let's
Baku firing.
Baku firing, yes.
Set me up for that, Paul. On the topic of Icelandic football, before we round off part one, we've got a shirt to give away, Paul. An Icelandic football shirt. Tell us about it.
Yeah, we do. I saw this shirt, and I have to say, it's so striking and so beautiful. It's made by our friends at Sangalo. So if you don't know Sangalo, they make some really interesting, exciting shirts, but they make them in conjunction with the clubs that they represent. And then obviously the money goes back to help those clubs. And those clubs are often dotted around the world in places where they may not be selling a lot of shirts. So it does a load of good for them, sort of raising their profile, bringing in some revenue. This shirt is the best futsal club in Iceland, who I am going to try and pronounce, and always apologies to Icelandic people and their culture. Isbjörnin futsal club. Isbjörnin futsal club. That's what I'm going to go with. The shirt, it's just beautiful. It's got a kind of roaring polar bear on an ice cap, and then the kind of Northern Lights patterning. And there are 3 colour schemes: a sort of a blue one, a red one, and a green one. And honestly, they're just stunning shirts, and I really wanted us to give one away, partly just so we could also flag up the work Sangalo are doing, because they are doing some brilliant work.
That was by far and away your best ever shirt description. We will have a photo for the video viewers, but if you've been listening to the audio version of this podcast, Paul was absolutely nailed that. I feel like you must have been training.
Oh, but Lee, I'd love to say I've been training, but I think it's just that the first time I ever had to give a description, I was so bad. I think I just garbled. It's blue. or something like that. And ever since, there's been this impression that I'm unable to describe items.
Well, for a chance to win that, you just have to join us on Patreon at patreon.com/sweeperpod. Everyone is automatically entered into that draw. We'll then pick a winner. We've also got plenty of content coming out on the Patreon at the moment, bonus podcasts and the like. We've had a lot of people signing up on the annual membership as well. So thank you so much for your support. You get 10% off if you sign up annually. That will do for part one. Quick break from us now, and then we'll be back to round up everything from the Americas to Oceania in part two. Welcome back to part two of The Sweeper, in which we'll be rounding up the rest of the continents with the exception of Africa. Now, you might be thinking, Cape Verde are about to become the second smallest country to ever reach a World Cup. They recruit players on LinkedIn. You have to talk about them. And you would be right. But we're pretty confident Cape Verde are going to make it now. And so we will tell their full story and hear from their camp if and when they do in October. For now, though, let's start the roundup with the Americas. And Paul, I think probably one of the standouts from the September window was Suriname. They're currently top of their CONCACAF World Cup qualifying group.
Yeah, and the biggest win, probably the most unlikely, was this El Salvador win. To win away against El Salvador. Not only are El Salvador comfortably ranked higher than them in the FIFA rankings, it's also a really hard place to go. You know, as you'd expect, it's a passionate, loud, difficult atmosphere. So yeah, something is really cooking in Suriname.
I was really interested as to why Suriname are actually doing a lot better now. And it seems like they've done something concrete. They have introduced back in 2019 a sports passport initiative enabling players of dual nationality to represent the team. Now, Suriname is a former Dutch colony, but previously players with dual Dutch Surinamese nationality were not allowed to represent the team. That has now changed, and as you can see, it's had a major impact on the Surinamese squad, with 23 of the 26 players in September having dual nationality, primarily Surinamese and Dutch. And you can see how that is going to benefit the team, and they also seem to have quite a sort of Dutch DNA to their style of play now. If we're sort of harking back to the days of total football, they completed 421 passes away to El Salvador, and they have a Dutch coach as well. I think they're really benefiting from this Dutch influence.
Yeah, and it's interesting because I feel like this is a bit of a theme across the world. But a lot of nations now are embracing players of heritage who often are dual nationality because they've grown up somewhere else. You know, they often maybe haven't even been to the country they're representing, but it's a very big part of their kind of upbringing, their roots. And there's always been a tension between that and the drive to make sure domestic and homegrown leagues are progressing. And I feel like there's been a shift for several nations. I think one of the ones that comes to my mind is Sri Lanka, who are suddenly very much turning to heritage players. Often the results are much, much better. The only downside is whether that does cause a tension with the domestic league where suddenly players feel like they're just not going to get an opportunity.
I think another thing that they're benefiting from at the moment is the automatic qualification of the three co-hosts for this tournament, because the USA, Canada and Mexico would usually be the strongest opponents in the CONCACAF region. They're all at the tournament automatically, and because it's a 48-team World Cup this time too, that means there's more qualification spots available. 3 automatic spots, excluding those aforementioned co-hosts, and 2 intercontinental spots too. Do we think Suriname could do it, or is it just a moment in time where they're topping the group?
No, I think it's very much a possibility. And as you say, it's opened the door to countries who perhaps wouldn't have thought there was a way through. So I'd also extend that to Curacao, even though Jamaica have taken charge of that group. Curacao very much in the mix there. Honduras had a great start to qualification. They're looking well set. Haiti could challenge. You know, it's very exciting. This is the side product of this hosting combination. It has made CONCACAF for me one of the most exciting regions to focus on. It's opening it up to these newcomers.
A big shout out to Curacao as well for extending Dick Advocaat's contract, prompting the brilliant social media graphic of Dick extends from the Curacao football account. That got me for quite some time. That did. I enjoyed that. Off to South America next, Paul. Bolivia turning to altitude once again.
Yeah, and I've got to say, I felt very sorry for Venezuela in this. So Venezuela, we've focused on before being the only CONMEBOL country that have never reached a World Cup finals. They got off to a great start in this qualification, but the wheels just slowly sort of came off. And by the time we reached the last group games, there was almost a feeling of inevitability to their demise. Even though you would have thought the one thing that was least likely was Brazil being turned over by Bolivia. And as you've alluded to, Lee, it was kind of this unique trick that Bolivia can turn. It's somewhere between. It's not really gamesmanship. It's just taking advantage of your natural advantages, I suppose. But this thing of playing at an altitude that suddenly takes away any advantage the away side might have skill wise, and they seem to be able to beat almost anyone.
Yeah,
really.
I mean, I think this is strategically very sensible because at the beginning of this qualification campaign, they were playing at the Estadio Hernando Siles, which is 3,637 metres above sea level. Now, that's already really high, but their results at home, which they traditionally rely on, weren't great. And they then decided to switch to the Estadio El Alto, which is the highest altitude international football stadium in the world, 4,088 metres above sea level. Since then, won 4, drawn 2, and as you say, turned over Brazil 1-0. It's working.
Yeah. It's working. And there were a few other things. I mean, the Brazil were already qualified. Brazil had very little to play for. I bet they really didn't want to make that trip at all. Really interesting note is that Brazil ended up finishing 5th. So in normal times, before the expansion of this World Cup, when back in the days of the 32 team, Brazil would be struggling to qualify at all. So it doesn't reflect well on Brazil, this qualification campaign. But for me, it's the difference between Bolivia's home and away form. It does sort of flag how big an impact this is. They barely win a game away from home, do they, really?
Yeah, and that makes me wonder, because now they are going through to this intercontinental playoff, which will be held in Mexico. And I wonder if they've already been looking at the map to try and work out what the highest altitude venues are at the 2026 World Cup. It is Mexico City, in case you're wondering. But the Interconfederation playoffs are being held at the other 2 Mexican venues, Guadalajara, 1,550 metres, and Monterrey, only 540 metres, Paul.
That's not the height they want to be playing at, is it? But on the other hand, it's all there to play for in this intercontinental playoff. You'd sort of think CONMEBOL's representative would expect to be one of the stronger in this, because you got the two CONCACAF teams, one from Africa, one from Asia, and then we know it's New Caledonia coming in from Oceania. I think you'd probably think, given that Bolivia have been playing very strong opposition in qualification, that they may actually already have the advantage in this altitude aside. It's going to be a fascinating thing anyway. I can't wait to see these games. It's everything we love, teams coming from all these different confederations and teams that are maybe not usually in the mix for qualification meeting with these huge games.
I think I can speak for both of us when I say that we are New Caledonia all the way, aren't we, in the intercontinental playoffs? It would be amazing to see an overseas territory at the tournament. That's only ever happened once before in World Cup history. That was the Dutch East Indies pool in 1938. Now Indonesia, of course, but back then.
Yes. And that's still their only appearance at a World Cup, isn't it? I think so. Indonesia, as it stands, that's their only appearance. No, we'll be fully on board with New Caledonia. Interesting to see where that squad comes from. I believe a lot of them are European based, but I don't know if that's better coming from Europe or better coming from Oceania.
Who have New Caledonia announced a friendly against, Paul, in the next international window on the 8th of October?
Gibraltar.
Yes.
And it feels very much like this is something we would have done.
Yeah, they are playing at the Europa Point Stadium. This is at the tip of the Gibraltarian Peninsula with a lovely view of Africa in the distance on the 8th of October. It's not the shortest distance, is it, Paul, to organise a friendly for? 17,500 kilometres seems like a long way to go.
It does. And New Caledonia don't tend to play a lot of friendlies, and that's maybe why. It's, the distances are huge. Oceania teams generally struggle to play as many friendlies because it's just so hard to get anywhere in that region. But I do think when you look at their squad list, I feel like a large proportion of the squad are actually playing in lower league French divisions. So I would suspect a European-based squad would make this a lot more of a logical trip. In which case, it's almost interesting that New Caledonia haven't been playing more games in Europe using players from the French leagues. So I don't know whether they'll send some from New Caledonia who'll make the massive trip and some who'll come just from France, or whether they'll just use a French-based squad.
I was thinking we should go to this until the aforementioned Amateur Nations Cup was organised at the very same time. But I would love to go to this friendly.
Yeah, it looks amazing, doesn't it? As you say, something about the view, the fact it's one of the most stunning sort of locations, and just the weirdness of seeing New Caledonia rocking up to a game in the European continent. I was really tempted. I started looking at flights, and then, as you say, it's complicated by this amateur cup that's arrived on your doorstep.
Yeah, I think I'll probably go to that, to be honest. But I would love to be going back to Gibraltar. Elsewhere in world football in September, in Asia, Uzbekistan won what, Paul?
Yeah, that's what a lot of people have been saying. They won.
Yeah.
This one slipped under the radar. They won the CAFA Nations Cup, which is Central Asian Nations Cup, right? Which I think there's only been two of them. This is the second edition of the tournament, so it's kind of, we're forgiven for not necessarily having our eyes on this. It sounded like it was a pretty hard slog of a tournament for them. I think they had to dig pretty deep to win it. But it's, nice for them to win a trophy. This is only their second ever trophy.
Yeah, I think they won the Asian Games back in the 90s, but this is a part of a recent resurgence by the Uzbek national team, who have qualified for their first ever World Cup in 2026, one of the already confirmed debutants, and now they have won this tournament. And by no means was it easy opposition, by the way, because Iran were their opponents in the final, whom they lost to in the last edition of this CAFA Nations Cup. They beat them thanks to a 120th minute goal to end, what was a 13-year winless run against Iran. So things are looking pretty good for Uzbekistan at the moment, aren't they?
They really are. And as you say, Iran are absolutely no pushovers. They are a very tough team to beat. So it was an intriguing competition, this. Exciting times for Uzbekistan.
Nepal, Paul. I wasn't expecting to talk about Nepal as part of our international roundup today, but their friendly with Bangladesh was cancelled due to civil unrest. You may have seen on the news that youth-led demonstrations have broken out in Kathmandu and other parts of Nepal over government corruption and social media censorship. So Nepal's friendly with Bangladesh was cancelled, but the reason I actually bring this up was just a very funny anecdote that happened on a recent visit back home for me. So I was sitting on the sofa with my mum, and she said to me, "Have you got any travel plans for the next few months?" Now, I'm thinking of going to Nepal because my girlfriend Sonia is doing her master's thesis in Kathmandu in November. So I had a look for the football fixtures, of course, as you do, and I saw that Nepal have a game against Malaysia in November. So I thought, fantastic, I can go there and see some Nepalese football. And so I was sitting on the sofa with my mum. She said, "What are your travel plans for the next few months?" And I said, I'm thinking about going to Nepal in November. And the news was on in the background. And within 2 seconds of her saying that, the newsreader announced, protesters have set fire to the Nepalese parliament. And I just turned to my mum and said, "Maybe not then." The timing, unbelievable.
Incredible timing. There's actually, I don't know if you've seen it, but there's this amazing story that there was a travel vlogger was out in Nepal at the time, was just supposed to be there on a kind of routine trip, typical kind of travel vlogs, and has ended up documenting this entire process of like the overthrow of the government, and has become almost like a kind of figurehead for this youth movement that they want to make him some sort of honorary role because he's been right in the middle of them the whole time, sort of pointing his camera, looking completely baffled by what's going on.
I guess that's like his equivalent of when San Marino won for us.
Yeah, except we saw that, at least we saw that coming a little bit. I mean, imagine just pitching up and be like, right, is this what you guys normally get up to? Or and the other thing is, they, I think this is true, this young Gen Z movement apparently elected who they were going to make the new prime minister over Discord. I will point out that if you join our Patreon and go on our Discord, we don't have the option either to appoint Nepal's next leader or to take one of us out and put you in.
But we do have cracking content, so it is worth it. But no ability to elect world leaders, unfortunately. Finally, today, Paul, Northern Mariana Islands. They had the under-23s had a bit of a David versus Goliath clash with whom?
With China. So this was the under-23s playing against China. I can't think of a bigger disparity that takes place in population in world football. So Northern Mariana Islands have 44,000 inhabitants. China has about 1.4 billion. I don't know if there's a bigger sort of David versus Goliath battle than that in world football. It went with Goliath. Goliath crushed David, sadly, on this occasion. I think it was 10-0. But yeah, again, great the Northern Mariana Islands are competing on that stage. They are actually still not a full FIFA member. I think they're in the process of trying to get that status. So they are allowed to play in kind of regional tournaments. They're not allowed to qualify for the World Cup. I really would love to see them in World Cup qualifiers soon.
I did a bit of digging, of course, and I found out that there is actually one bigger population disparity. If Northern Mariana Islands played in an AFC game against India, it would be 44,000 versus 1.46 billion, whereas China is 1.4 billion.
Yes, of course, because India's just overtaken China relatively recently, hasn't it, in population? I guess we're talking about fixtures within confederations because they will happen, right? Because there will be bigger disparities. I think Montserrat is the smallest by population, on island, isn't it? Of the FIFA members. So say Montserrat were to play China, that would be even bigger because I think the on-island population is only about 5,000. But I guess we're looking at fixtures that are more likely to happen because they're within confederation.
There is apparently 32,000 Chinese people for every one citizen of the Northern Mariana Islands. So some disparity, but as you say, great they're taking part. That was that an under-23 Asian Cup qualifier?
Yeah, that's right. And final mention of Northern Mariana Islands, because I always try and drop it in. They're the ones who have a club called Latte FC. So I always think about them whenever I'm ordering a coffee. I'm like, Northern Mariana Islands have a team called Latte FC.
Surely they have to appoint Francesco Calzona when it doesn't, when he leaves Slovakia.
Yeah,
that's
the natural next job. Either there or Ethiopian Coffee FC, I suppose.
Yeah, I suppose. The logical choices, of course. We were going to do a little bit about the African Champions League, which is starting very soon. We didn't have time once we'd already prepared the full agenda for today. But where can you get our full lowdown on the CAF Champions League, the AFC Champions League, and some other continental club competitions, Paul?
As that's going to be on our Patreon, on our bonus podcast. So if you join our Patreon, you get a podcast on the weeks we don't have a main podcast. So effectively, you get every week a podcast. And it's going to be a really fun one, that one actually. As Lee says, it didn't fit into this one, but there is so much good stuff on that pod. So if you do join our Patreon, that'll be coming your way next week.
Yeah, I was doing some digging just last night on the 2 Wikipedia red links that are in the CAF Champions League, one from South Sudan and one from Equatorial Guinea, and I found out some nice stuff about them. So all of that coming up on the next bonus podcast. But for now, thank you for listening, and we will see you either for said bonus podcast on Wednesday, the 24th of September, or we'll see you at the beginning of October for another main podcast on Wednesday, the 1st of October.